Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jessica Yang. I'm a product manager on the Intune Android device management team. And today with me on the line, I also have some colleagues from across our Android and Apple teams. So, I'm going to be covering both platforms in this session. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask them, and myself or one of my teammates will be able to answer your queries. So today we are going to be talking about frontline worker device management in Intune. And one thing that we hear a lot at conferences is essentially, I didn't know that Intune could do this. I didn't know that Intune even managed these types of scenarios. So today I want to go over, just how Intune thinks of frontline workers and devices. We'll talk about some options that you have for setting up these types of devices. We'll go over some of the features that Intune offers for frontline worker productivity. And then finally, we'll kind of put it together with a couple of pretty simple example scenarios of what that looks like on both Apple and Android devices. And my goal for you today is to be able to walk away with a better understanding of what Intune offers in this regard. So let's get started with the overview. How does Intune think of frontline workers? How do we think of them at Microsoft? Well, our definition of a frontline worker is somebody who, regardless of their education or industry, somebody who works directly with customers, clients, and recipients of services. So I'll have a couple more slides that explain more. But essentially, in these situations, technology is really a supplementary tool and not the focus. And it's critical that we enable just the right amount of technology to meet frontline worker needs, but not too much. Like, you really don't want to overwhelm these individuals and distract them from the rest of their jobs. In terms of the types of devices that we think about managing, we tend to split frontline worker devices into these three categories. So this is not comprehensive, but these are just kind of common scenarios that we see among customers. So we have single user devices, multi-user, as well as kiosk devices. In all cases, these devices are going to provide access to information, ensure customer interactions are seamless, and just enable some critical and niche job responsibilities that these frontline workers have. So starting with single user devices, examples of these would be maybe mobile computers that get assigned to employees. These are typically purchased by the organization, so they're corporate owned, and devices are assigned directly to employees for the duration of their tenure at the organization. You might have some personalization allowed in terms of the apps or the functionality on the device. And an example of this would be, for example, a mobile computer that is assigned to a law enforcement officer. So this is a single device that this one officer uses throughout the day for a variety of different tasks throughout the day. Next, we have multi-user task devices, which are again purchased for corporate use by the organization. But in this case, instead of a one-to-one, you have a one-to-many assignment between the device and the frontline worker. So multiple people might be reusing this one device throughout a shift, for example, or the device might get handed off between different roles at the organization. When the device is being used, a user can sign in and out of apps on the device to access information that's relevant to them. So on the right, we have an example of how a single device might be used throughout the day between three different roles, where each user might need to sign in and out of a different set of apps to perform a different set of tasks that is relevant to their job. A lot of the features that we're going to be covering later on in the presentation are specific to these types of shared devices. So we'll cover this a bit later as well. And finally, we have kiosk type devices, which are purchased by the organization for use as more locked down static device, stationary devices. So these are usually used for apps that don't have many identity requirements that tend to be for showing very specific curated information. So some examples would be, digital signage or price tracker in a grocery store, for example, shared calendar, apps that are primarily showing information that don't really require user identity or logins. And I just want to give a final word on Intune's relationship to the frontline worker ecosystem. So as Intune, we talk with customers, partners, platform ecosystem owners to develop our frontline worker experiences. So we partner with the platform owners, such as Apple and Google, to design and build features together to offer better management solutions for these scenarios. We also have partnerships with OEMs, device manufacturers, based on our common goals and strategies for device management. So some of them are on the screen right now. And on Android, to ensure that we're prepared for all kinds of deployments, we invest in solutions that are based on both the Android Management API platform stack, as well as Android open source project, which I'll get to a bit later as well on the types of devices that this lets us manage. All right, so that was just a very quick overview to orient ourselves on the types of devices and scenarios that we're talking about today. And now I'm going to go into a blitz with a bunch of different demos on how you can set up these devices and how you can actually use them to enable your frontline workers using Intune. So let's start off with talking about setting these up. In terms of the native management and enrollment options that you get from the platform, and I'm going to be covering both Apple Shared iPad as well as Android Enterprise and AOSP options. So starting off on the Apple side, Apple offers a solution called Shared iPad, which is our recommendation for Microsoft 365 on iPad OS. Shared iPad has two sub-modes. You have a regular Shared iPad as well as what we call a Shared iPad with a temporary session. So these are both platform-based solutions that are configured with iOS and iPad OS automated device enrollment policies. This is Apple's corporate enrollment program. And in both these cases, there's no user device affinity. So these solutions are great for shared devices. First, let's talk about the regular shared iPad. So shared iPad is really great for scenarios where you have users in different roles who are using the same single shared device. In this case, there are predefined user partitions that are created on the device by iPadOS. So there's user data separation between these partitions, and those are protected using personal pins that are enforced by the operating system. And each user gets their own apps, data, DM payloads, web clips, and so on. This does require Manage Apple ID, and it's available on iPadOS 13.4 and up. I have a quick demo of what this looks like. So here's my shared iPad, and I'm going to have my first user signing in with an Apple ID. That user is going to be prompted to go through setup, as you can see here. And now they end up on the home screen. When you lock the device, it saves the session data, and then now we have a switcher that lets you pick between two users. My second user is going to enter their passcode, and you can see after that switch happens, their apps and data are completely separate from that first user. So for example, I come in and my Excel sheet is open. And once again, when I click that sign out in the bottom right, I see a list of the recent users and I can sign in as another user. So that was for the same device being shared between different roles. But what if you don't need different apps per user, or maybe not everybody has a managed Apple ID. In this case, you can use what we call the shared iPad with temporary session. So this is great for scenarios where every user sharing the device is using the same set of apps, they have the same role, and this also gives you flexibility without the managed Apple ID or Entra ID federation. Essentially, iPad OS is creating a disposable temporary session for each user. And then between those users, all of the app data, user data is going to get cleared from the device. And this is again available on iPad OS 13.4 and up, and it's enforceable on 14.5 and up. Oops, sorry. Okay, so in this demo, we'll see what that looks like. So here's my first user. I'm going to press the home button, and that will start the temporary session. I might sign into one of my Microsoft apps on the device, in this case, Teams. And this sign-in is going to establish single sign-on across all supported apps using the Entra SSO plugin. So now I'm in Teams, I can see my information. If I open Outlook, for example, I'm going to get that single sign-on again, and I'll be able to see all of my resources there. That single sign-on also works in Safari and web clips using that same plugin. And when I sign out using that bottom right key, all of my app data is going to get cleared. So the device is now going to be ready for the second user. Again, they're going to press home to sign in. And then kind of the same thing. They're going to be able to sign into apps with their own account, and this does not require a managed Apple ID. So switching gears a bit, let's look at Android native solutions. So talking about Android enrollment solutions in Intune, there's a lot of complexity in this space. And I know, just talking about what's on the screen right now, this could be a whole nother session by itself. But I think the point that I want to get across is that Intune offers a lot of different management types on Android to meet your organization's needs. Now, in terms of frontline worker devices, typically you're going to be using the enrollment modes that I have in the red box here. So they're going to be corporate devices that are managed with or without user affiliation. In addition to Android Enterprise, which is a kind of Google-based management offering, Intune also offers management for Android open source project-based devices, which do not go through Android Enterprise management. So what this means essentially is that you get support for a really wide range of form factors on devices for different types of frontline uses. So on the left, these are some examples of devices that you can manage through Android Enterprise. They tend to have more of a typical phone, tablet kind of form factor. They might be ruggedized, but usually those types of form factors. And then on the right, these are some examples of the supported devices that you can manage using Intune AOSP management. So VR headsets that are integrated with hard hats, for example. And this list of supported devices is always growing based on customer requests. In both cases, you're going to get user-based and user list management with support for configuration, compliance, certificates, Wi-Fi, all the standard stuff. You'll notice that I didn't talk about iOS yet. So what happens when you have an iOS device or you have a situation where there's no native support for this kind of multi-user situation? Well, that's where Entra Shared Device Mode comes in. So Entra Shared Device Mode is a feature set that gives you a multi-user experience at the app level, even if the OS itself doesn't provide that support. You get a single sign-in and sign-out experience across all supported apps on the device. And when you have that sign-out from apps or from the profile, you also get data cleanup from those apps. So after completing their shift or after when it's time to hand off the device to someone else, your frontline worker can just sign out from one of the supported apps, and that will sign them out from all apps that support this feature. And it's going to be ready for the next frontline worker. Shared device mode also supports user-based conditional access, and you can get this type of single sign-in, sign-out functionality through integrating with the Microsoft Authentication Library, which is available to all app developers. And this is available on both iOS and Android. So here are some of the apps that shared device mode is integrated with by default. For the apps that you see on the screen, you don't require any changes, so the app just needs to be installed on the device from the App Store, and you get the benefits that come with shared device mode. If you have an app that you need that's not on this page, but you want to get that kind of single sign-in, sign-out functionality, you have a couple of options. So for Microsoft applications, you could use either Teams or Edge to run a web version of that app and still get those benefits. And for third-party or line of business apps, you could either build custom apps in Power Apps to automatically get shared device mode support, or you could integrate with that Microsoft Authentication Library that I mentioned earlier. And you can also open a web-based version of the app that uses that library in Edge. So a couple of different options to get support for shared device mode. So that was me going through some of the options you have for setting up devices. Now let's move on to once your devices are set up, how do you get your workers to be productive faster? And I'm going to be talking about two features that we're pretty excited about to get you to that point even quicker than before. The first of these is device staging. So device staging is a feature set that is available on both Android Enterprise and Apple iPhones or iPads. And what this lets you do is essentially set up a device partially or stage it, and then box it up, ship it to your frontline worker, and then allow the end user to complete that setup when they unbox it. So this lets you optimize your frontline worker productivity and reduce setup costs because you kind of take that initial setup phase that can be confusing or result in a lot of help desk tickets and abstract that away from your frontline worker. On Apple devices, the way that this works in detail is that it takes a device that's enrolled with ADE from without user affinity to having user affinity. And this is performed through a specific app configuration policy. And you can do a search for our documentation to learn more. But it's set up through this app configuration policy. On Android corporate profile and fully managed devices. This is done through a different type of enrollment token. And I'm just going to show with a demo what this looks like. So when you create an enrollment profile for Android Enterprise, you can select to create a profile with a staging token. So here it says via staging. And I'm showing screenshots now. I'll have a video in a second. But essentially what that does is just takes all of these initial setup steps that previously your end user would have done and allows you to complete them beforehand, before the end user has to unbox the device, so that when your user does get the device, the experience is really simple. They just open the Intune app, sign in, follow the prompts, and the device is going to be ready to use. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So initially, I scanned the QR code with that staging token, and now my kidder, or the person doing the setup, is going to go through all of those screens that I talked about to get the device set up. At this point now, the device is in the hands of the end user, and you can see that they just open the Intune app, they sign in, enter their username and password, and then from there on, the device is contacting Intune and completing the registration. So essentially, the process for the frontline worker is just much more simple and much more streamlined. And this, we believe this will save your users a ton of time and reduce the support tickets that you might get from challenges during that initial enrollment period. So at this point now on the screen, you can see the device is now fully enrolled, and policies that are targeted to this user are going to start flowing. And this video is in real time, so you can see, once that setup was completed, the apps that I have targeted to this user, they start showing up on the home screen immediately within a couple of seconds. So it's a really smooth setup experience for your end user. Next, I want to talk about a feature that we're pretty excited about that has been in preview called enrollment time grouping. So what I just showed you, that device staging feature set, that's for devices that have user affinity. But in a lot of cases with shared devices, you're going to have devices that do not have that user affiliation. So they're going to be in device groups instead. And historically, on devices that are in these groups, especially through dynamic groups, after enrollment, it might have taken a number of hours, up to 8 post-enrollment for all the policies and apps relevant to that device to get delivered. The reason this happens is that there are a lot of steps involved between when you get the device enrolled and when those policies actually get delivered. And each of these steps has a latency associated with it. So, if you add a couple of minutes here, a couple of minutes there, the end result is just that it can be hard to predict when that device is actually going to be fully ready for your frontline worker to use. Now, with enrollment time grouping, what happens is that you kind of skip all of those steps in the middle. So when you skip those steps, you also skip the latency that's associated with those steps, and that reduces the time between enrollment and being ready for use by your employee. So you can go from a matter of hours to a matter of a couple of minutes. I think in our testing, we generally see setup being completed in less than 5 minutes on average. And essentially, the way this works is that before enrolling the device, you pre-assign them to Entra groups. And then when the device gets enrolled, it's going to look up which Entra group it's associated with. And since those groups are pre-assigned, everything is pre-computed, and those policies, app settings, they get delivered to the device much more quickly after the enrollment happens. You are also able to recategorize, so change which group these devices are in after the initial enrollment, and you don't need to re-enroll the device again. So enrollment time grouping right now is in a private preview. We're hoping for it to be generally available in the first half of the year. And it's going to be on these Android enrollment modes as well as iOS or iPad OS through ADE. So I just covered a couple of features that come into play right before your frontline worker actually starts using the device. What happens afterwards? You want to give your users a consistent user experience, both for support reasons, branding reasons. It just makes your fleet much more consistent. And you have a bunch of options on Apple natively through kind of just Apple device restrictions policy to do that. But on Android, it can get a little complicated. And so I'm just offering that we have on Android right now for that reason. But I'm happy to talk more about Apple later during the Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. So in terms of user experience options on Android devices, we have what we call, oops, the headings on here are wrong. But on the left, we have the OEM launcher, or kind of the default launcher that devices ship with. So this is just the default home screen that a device comes with. You have access to settings, you have access to the Play Store. It's just a regular, same as if you were to buy a device retail. In the middle, we have what we call single app kiosk mode. This is a setting that you can configure in Intune that lets you restrict devices to one specific app. So for focus use cases such as signs, kiosks, task-based devices. And finally, on the right, if you have scenarios that are kind of in between these two, you want some degree of flexibility. You might want to have multiple apps, but you also want to have a lockdown experience. That's when we would advise you to use multi-app kiosk mode. So this is a way of setting up devices that is available with the Microsoft Manage home screen, which is a launcher app that Intune offers for Android Enterprise dedicated as well as fully managed devices. The fully managed part is relatively new, so if you haven't checked out Manage Home Screen in a while, there are a bunch of new updates. This is one of the more exciting ones. And essentially what Manage Home Screen lets you do is deliver a really predictable and consistent end user experience, regardless of what type of device you are running on. So, you might have a tablet, mobile computer that out of the box come with different pre-installed apps, different UIs. Manage Home Screen lets you get a seamless, consistent user experience on all of them, regardless of the device type. I'm not going to read out everything on the slide, but just some of the examples of the types of customizations that you can do with Manage Home Screen are, you can set a custom wallpaper, you can lock the device down to just the apps that you want, you can put them in the places that you want on the home screen, have folders, as well as you can, in addition to that type of lockdown experience for apps, you can also lock down access to settings. So, for example, you can choose which settings you want available to your user, as well as offer quick access to troubleshooting information on the device. Manage Home Screen is integrated out of the box with Shared Device Mode, which we talked about earlier. So, for example, you can have your users do a sign-in initially with their Entra account, and then that will sign them into all supported apps on the device. Users can also lock their sessions by setting a local PIN. They can resume their sessions after an activity. If someone locked their device and put it down and walked away, forgot to sign out, you can also switch users. So just a lot of flexibility in the way that you can manage these multi-user scenarios using Manage Home Screen. If you haven't looked at Manage Home Screen in a while, the experience changed, I want to say, in the last quarter of last year. So on the left here, we have what the old experience looked like. On the right are some screenshots of what the new experience looks like. So we partner with customers and we did a lot of user research to try and really reorganize it, make it cleaner, make it easier to use, provide elements that customers have been asking for, such as a customizable top bar and more easy access to settings. Another example of that would be, in the past, settings were accessed through this pull-down menu from the top, and now you have this completely customizable page that you can get to from the top bar. I was talking earlier about the ability to give users quick access to troubleshooting features as well. So on the right here, you have some examples of what that looks like. When you open settings, you can drop out of kiosk mode temporarily if you need to access system settings to do something, as well as open other related management apps or upload logs for Intune support. And just a couple of other features that we've added in the past quarter. The task switcher has been improved, and we've been adding even more settings, such as adaptive brightness and control over rotation, as well as the ability to display the Wi-Fi MAC address. So we have another demo. Let's take a look at the experience of using Manage Home Screen. So I'm going to go to Android Enterprise and create a device restrictions policy. Give it a name. And then now when I go to device experience, you can see I can pick between single and multi-app modes, which I talked about earlier. I'm going to choose multi-app, which is associated with Manage Home Screen, and choose some of the apps that I want to be accessible to my frontline worker on Manage Home Screen. I can also pick some of the settings that I want to be available in the settings menu, and enable that leave kiosk mode option so that I can escape Manage Home Screen and go back to the OEM launcher in case I need to. And then we'll take a look at the device experience for that. So here you have a device that has been enrolled with Intune using a QR enrollment token. And now my frontline worker, when they pick up the device, they're going to be presented with that logon screen, and they can set a PIN for their session as well. Once they land on Manage Home Screen, you can see my frontline worker is automatically signed in to the apps that she needs. Moving on in the life cycle, I want to talk a bit about the options you have for manage device. They leave the nest. So Intune offers capabilities around finding lost or stolen devices. We have a locate device feature, which lets you find these devices using maps. There is also the option to play a lost device sound. So, if you have a device that doesn't have GPS, or a device that maybe someone dropped on the floor and is hard to see, you can remotely trigger a sound that's going to play at full blast on the device so that you can locate it. And this is available both on iOS and Android Enterprise dedicated. On Android Enterprise, we also offer more specific controls on update management. So the capabilities for this are going to the capabilities are going to vary by the device manufacturer, but in general, the type of management that you can do is you can prevent automatic upgrades, you lock the device to a specific firmware version, and you can also set some of the prerequisites, the conditions for updates to happen. So on Samsung devices, this is done through an integration with Samsung's Knox ePhoto solution. And the Samsung ePhoto console has integration with your Intune and Entra groups. So you can use Knox ePhoto to manage updates without having to recreate your Intune groups. All of those groups will be imported into the Samsung console, and you can manage them directly from there. On Zebra devices, Intune also offers integration with Zebra's Lifeguard over-the-air service, and I have a demo of that on the next slide. But yeah, these are available on Android Enterprise devices from these manufacturers respectively. And we are always talking with customers and partners, manufacturers to understand what other integrations we can provide. So let me show you what that Zebra integration looks like as an example. So in the Intune console, after I've enrolled my Zebra devices, I can go and create a firmware update deployment. I can pick which model of devices I want to be updating, and that's going to show me the different firmware options available, and these are synced from Zebra servers. I can also set a schedule for the updates. So, I pick the time zone for the devices, and let's say I have a specific maintenance period on the weekend. I can configure that. And I can also set other conditions for the update. So I can define a minimum battery level that the devices need before the update. I can make sure that it's connected to the charger and say that I only want updates to happen on Wi-Fi. So this way I can just really ensure that those updates don't disrupt my operations or compromise my security. Next, I want to talk about remote help, which is an offering on Intune Plan 2 or Intune Suite, which lets you remotely assist employees, verify user experiences, and so on. Remote help is kind of what it sounds like on the box. It lets you remotely help a device, so it supports both attended modes and unattended modes. And again, I have a demo of that in a second. But in all of these cases, you're going to have session history reporting, Intune role-based access controls, and proof of helper identity to make sure that the connection is secure when you're remoting into these devices. So here we have a demo of what remote help looks like. And this is a slightly older video, so it has the old manage home screen design, but the current design is in the slides that I showed earlier. And basically I have my device, I can initiate a remote help session. In this case, I'm gonna say I wanna start an unattended control session. So my device is, maybe sitting in a warehouse somewhere and there's nobody around, but Intune is gonna call into the device. You see it spinning for a while here because as a safety and privacy safeguard, we do have a cooldown timer that needs to time out before the session starts, just to prevent malicious attempts at unattended access to devices. But once that timer is up, the device is going to be connected, and you can see, the device was just sitting there, so the home screen is off. But that's not a worry, because using remote help, we can simulate inputs to the device and wake it up. So here I'm going to tap on the home screen, which wakes the device up. And then I can go into my settings. Maybe I got a complaint that something isn't working with Bluetooth on the device. I can go in and make sure, oh, Bluetooth's off, turn it back on, and then verify that the issue is fixed and log out of the device, all remotely from the Intune admin console without ever needing to call anyone or touch the device itself. All right. Next, we have a feature that is relatively new and pretty exciting. This is called Remove Apps and Configuration. So again, kind of what it sounds like. This lets you uninstall apps or remove configurations temporarily from device, and then restore them either as needed right after, or they will also get automatically restored later, just to prevent policy drift, where maybe you removed a configuration and you forgot to restore it afterwards. This is supported on, as you can see on the screen, Apple devices as well as various Android enterprise corporate devices. And this is really useful for situations where you can resolve issues by removing and restoring them again. So, when a frontline worker is having problems with apps, a lot of the time that first troubleshooting step is just uninstall it and reinstall it again. This lets you do that automatically without having to ask your frontline worker to do it themselves. You can also use this to temporarily remove restriction policies to let you perform troubleshooting actions and then restore them afterwards so that you don't have drift from your initial configuration. Just a couple of details. I don't think I'll spend too long on this just for time. Yeah, items are automatically restored. There is a limit on how many items you can remove per device. And actions are deleted after a week, but they're included in your audit logs and monitoring logs. So a quick demo of what this looks like. So here I have a couple of devices, and let's say I got a support call from my Frontline worker that the company app the employee hub app isn't working correctly. What I can do is now look at the apps and configs on that device, and then I can say I want to remove the Contoso employee hub. And you can see now that action gets submitted and it's in progress. And now when we refresh status, it's removed. On the device, the experience is kind of what you expect. The app gets uninstalled. But you can see the user actually stays in the home screen the whole time, so they're still within that lockdown experience. And then I can now restore the app, which is going to trigger a reinstall of the application. And once that policy hits the device, again, the app is going to be reinstalled, and hopefully the problems are going to be fixed. Okay, so I went through a bunch of different things, and I know it's a lot of information. So I have two examples on Android and iPad to just try and put it all together to show how these things can work together in an example scenario. So example number one, let's say you are configuring devices for a retail store associate. And let's say you're using the Samsung X Cover ruggedized series of devices. So we have a couple of requirements. We have to deploy certain apps. We want to use Teams for walkie-talkie. These devices are not one-to-one, so they're going to be shared between multiple workers. I want to show some troubleshooting information on the device to streamline my support experience. I want to make sure there's a freeze for system updates. I want to make sure that apps are only installed during certain conditions, and I want to make sure that I can only connect to the store networks. So one example of how you could use Intune to set this up would be I can enroll the device with Android Enterprise dedicated, and then I can use shared device mode to get that multi-user experience that I would like. I'll use Intune to deploy apps, including the Manage Home screen, which gives me that consistent experience, as well as the ability to show troubleshooting information very easily. And then I can use other Intune policies to set up a maintenance window for when my system updates install. I might want to use the Samsung ePhoto integration for even further control of that. I can use device configurations to prioritize app updates, use OEM config policies to enable certain Samsung-specific policies, as well as restrict my Wi-Fi. Example number 2, let's say you're in a health organization and you have a fleet of iPads that you want to distribute as patient devices. In this scenario, the requirements are you want to make sure that, again, there's a consistent user experience. There's very clear branding that this is a device that belongs to the hospital. Devices might be loaned to patients for a certain amount of time, but you don't want any patient data to persist between those users. And again, you want to have control over which apps and which networks this device has. So in this case, you could set this device up with automated device enrollment as a shared iPad with temporary session. And again, temporary session is that second shared iPad mode where data gets cleared between different users. And then you would use Intune to deploy the apps that you want the users to have access to, as well as use some of the platform native device configuration options to set lock screen wallpaper, restrict the home screen layout, and again, restrict the allowed Wi-Fi networks that this device can connect to. Okay, I've been talking for a very long time. I promise this is my last slide. So just to recap everything that we covered today, I think the main message that I hope you take away from this is that Intune offers a range of different options for your scenarios so that you can mix and match what works for your organization. And today we covered ways of setting up your devices. So we talked about different native enrollment options, and we did a very quick overview of the types of devices that Intune supports. We also talked about ways that you can enable your shared device scenarios in addition to one-to-one devices. And then we talked about ways that you can customize your user experiences, for example, with Manage Home Screen or device configuration policies, as well as features that we're releasing to help you get to a productive device faster than before. Finally, we also talked about ways of managing devices once they're out in the field. So with features such as find lost devices, update management, remote help, as well as removing apps and configuration. So I'll let you take a screenshot of this slide, and I will pause to see the questions that we have. And at this point, I do have, again, like I mentioned, I have a couple of other people from the Intune team across platforms who are available to answer questions too. So let me see what we have.
Hey, Jess. Yeah, we actually a ton of questions, interesting enough, on shared iPad. So maybe Anya can help with some of these. But one of the ones I captured was, if we only use the temporary session for shared iPad, can we configure shared iPad without federated Apple IDs or an Entra ID? Anya, is that one you can answer?
Yep. So temporary sessions for shared iPad do not require managed Apple ID and or Entra Federation. So that's something that if you're using shared iPad, that's not something you have to worry about.
Cool, thank you, Anya. Another one that I caught was, can we create containers in Apple devices like Android? And I think it was a little bit of a weird question, but curious your thoughts on that one.
By containers, I'm assuming that means user partitions, where when the user logs into or signs into the device, it creates a user partition on the shared iPad device. And then the storage that is on the device is just evenly spread out between however many users are cached on the device. We have 10 as the default in the enrollment policy, but that can be changed. So it depends how much storage is on the device, and then that's evenly spread out between the user partitions, where when the user signs out, everything that specific user is, of course, just only in that partition for that user and doesn't bleed over to other users. I don't know if that's what the question was looking for.
No, I think that's a great answer. Next up, the question I captured was, is managed home screen only for Android? And I don't know, maybe Abigail wants to come off mute and answer that one.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abigail Stein. I am a product manager for Managed Home Screen. Today, Managed Home Screen is only supported on Android. And just to be a little bit more specific, Managed Home Screen is supported on Android Enterprise dedicated devices and kiosk mode dedicated devices and fully managed devices. It is not supported on iOS today.
Cool, thank you, Abigail. Another one for Abigail. Will the top bar, when configured with Managed Home Screen, be customizable in the future to remove it completely if not actively being used?
Great. So to address a few questions that came in about the top bar, today we offer customizations that admins can configure it to display device name, serial number, or tenant name. We are looking into further customizations. So that's not possible today. It cannot be removed completely. And we're not looking into removing it completely, but we are looking to offer more elements and perhaps some customization in regard to size.
Very cool. There's so many questions in here. I'm scrolling through to come up with the next good one. This may be another great one for Jessica, or I'm sorry, Anya. How many users can share one device provisioned in shared device mode?
So there's no limit in the console that is set or guardrails, but it just depends on how much storage is on the device and then how much storage is being taken up by apps and the OS and everything else on the device, which gets divided up by the number of users that are signing in and out of the iOS or iPadOS device in shared mode.
Great, thank you. Another one. I don't know who should be on point for this one. Is remove apps and configurations supported for shared iPad and shared device mode?
I believe it is, but I don't have any more details on that. But yes, it's supported.
Yeah, and I know I've done some testing with that, and it worked great. So I think we've got that one answered. Let me see if I could find another good one. Can shared iPad on shared device mode use the same user or update management capabilities as non-FLW shared user devices?
Yep, so today we have software update capabilities via declarative device management, which we recommend, or without DDM, where you can have your devices update automatically via MDM, and that is supported for any eligible iOS and iPadOS device in shared mode, in shared iPad, or not a shared device at all, an ADE device or a BYOD device, whatever it may be. The OS update capabilities work across the board for Apple devices.
Very cool. Did anybody else capture questions that we should try to answer here as well?
I did see there was a clarification on the question about user partitions on iOS and iPadOS, and basically just the clarification was, can I get kind of a work profile experience on Apple devices? And Anya, you can add more color on this, but I think I think from a management standpoint, it's a bit hard to draw a one-to-one parallel between work profiles on Android and what Anya was talking about, because fundamentally, just the way these devices are managed is quite different.
Yeah, that's correct. Because since we don't have today on iOS or iPadOS devices that like work profile specific experience of doubling the app with the work briefcase icon that Android has, I believe. Yeah, it's hard to map it exactly one-to-one. So I guess the answer is not yet.
Yeah, but it's always good to focus on what your scenarios are, like what is the problem you're trying to solve. You might not be able to apply the same thinking from Android to managing Apple, but the options that you have for achieving those goals, those should all still be there.
Oh, another one I did capture. Can we use app protection policies for apps with iOS shared device mode?
Yep, app protection policies are supported for your iOS devices in shared mode. Perfect. So you would just set those up as you would for any iOS devices not in shared mode and just send them down to your shared device groups or users.
Cool. Another one that just came in is the iOS shared iPad temporary session. Do users receive individual certs for VPN authentication?
I'm not sure on that one.
Yeah, this area I know a little bit about. So because the shared iPad is not doing a real any specific user sign-in, especially in the temporary only session, it's a guest. So there's no known user logging in. There wouldn't be any certificates delivered to the device specific to the user and the user properties. So the VPN use case of using VPN auth with a cert isn't something that you would really want to do on with the temporary session iPad. And I think
I see a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just one last question before the finish line. There's a question about using Manage Home Screen for Android. Does this support pushing Wi-Fi certs to the devices? The answer is yes. So if there are more details, we would encourage you to follow up with a ticket through the portal. And all right, I think we are roughly at time. I wanted to thank everybody for their questions, and also I saw we got a lot of really good feature feedback as well. So thank you so much for offering that, because it comes directly to us on the engineering team, the product team, and this helps us to prioritize our roadmap and what we work on in the future. And Jamie, I think I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, for your presentation on today's topic. And thank you for the team for answering all those questions. Looks like we had some really good ones come in. Again, thank you for everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time. Goodbye.